Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malaika Silcott. I'm the Assistant Director for Career Advising at the Tufts Career Center, and welcome to Gaining Experience in the COVID Era. If you don't have your audio on mute, I would like you to do that now, unless you're the speaker. We have a very condensed program today, so in an effort to stay on time, I will be acting as timekeeper. I also want to remind people on this call that it will be recorded. If this is your first Career Center event, welcome. We have our work cut out for us today, but our team wanted to offer everyone a comprehensive way to provide advice on our most popular question, especially in the environment of COVID. One thing I can tell you is that this whole program, regardless of whether you stay for just this portion or come back throughout the day, it will have different parts that will apply to every major and every class year. Our goal is to offer you insight into a variety of perspectives that will include current students, industry professionals, as well as some of our Career Center staff. Hopefully you've already looked at the agenda. As the MC, I'm going to try and put people's names in the chat if you forget. Just a reminder to take notes throughout whatever session you are in and to stay muted. If you have a question for any of the panelists or speaker during the session, occasionally I may remind you to put your question in the chat, or you can private message me, Malaika from the Career Center. If you, at the end of today, have a question and you want to follow up, I'm putting in the chat right now our link for seeing an advisor in the Career Center. If you've never had an advising appointment, feel free to make note of that link. So to get our program started, the Career Center is delighted to welcome back a fellow jumbo. Introducing Becky McCullough of HubSpot. She is the Vice President of Global Recruiting here in Massachusetts. I'm going to read her bio, and Becky's team is responsible for attracting and hiring top talent for HubSpot's global offices and the growing community of remote employees. Her team, which also includes recruiting operations and people analytics, is focused on scaling HubSpot's recruitment engine, from optimizing inclusive interview processes to examining the role data can play in hiring and employee retention, to executing HubSpot's mission to be a best place to work where employees of all backgrounds and perspectives can grow and thrive. Prior to joining HubSpot in 2015, Becky led an experienced hire recruiting for McKinsey & Company's North American offices and was an executive search consultant with Heinrich and Struggles. She has an MBA from Columbia Business School and an undergraduate degree from Tufts University. So it's my pleasure to welcome Becky.
Thank you so much, Malaika. Can everyone, can we get a quick thumbs up or, give me a quick acknowledgement in the chat? Can everyone see my screen? Everyone with us? Cool. I see some thumbs up already. Great to see this growing crew, and so proud to be a fellow jumbo with all of you. So I am here to talk to you a little bit about how to navigate your career and prepare for remote work in this unbelievable world that we are living in, especially with what's happened over the past year. But before we dive in there, I just want to give you a little bit of overview of me and my background and what led me to my role here at HubSpot. So I'm Becky. Here's my Twitter handle. I tend to tweet about all things talent, people, but also funny things my kids do. So if that interests you, follow me on Twitter. This is me on my graduation day with my group of girlfriends from Tufts who I am still very, very close with. I'm here second from the left on graduation day, but more importantly is the person on my left. And she is the reason that I'm actually at HubSpot today. Her name is Allison Elworthy. She's one of my dearest friends and also has been a longtime employee of HubSpot. She was the first female executive team member, and she currently runs our global revenue operations team. And when I think about my time at Tufts, so much of that experience was defined by the culture of support and encouragement that I found in my community. And it's led to my personal growth, my professional growth, not just while I was as a student, but in the years following. And so the first thing I want to say is you are all so lucky to be a part of the Tufts community. I personally have benefited from it. And I'm sure if you haven't already, you will continue to as well. So I run recruiting at HubSpot as well as people analytics. HubSpot, if you're not familiar with it, is on a mission to become the #1 CRM, that stands for Customer Relationship Management company, and makes marketing, sales, and customer success software to help millions of organizations grow better. My team is part of that mission by HubSpot itself grow with amazing, talented people. HubSpot has an award-winning culture. We're really proud to be named a best place to work for by Glassdoor, Comparably, Fortune, and more. And I think the thing that has been really important for us is recognizing the role that we can play in helping companies evolve or helping people evolve as we shift to more of a remote work culture. I'm really proud of where I am at in my role at HubSpot today, but the reality is successful career paths are never a straight shot. If you look at my experience, it's been a little bit more of a zigzag maze. And I think the one thing I want to say, as you all are navigating how to start or grow your careers in the middle of a pandemic, is that unexpected obstacles are always going to come up. And the thing you need to think about is not how that holds you back, but how you learn from that, how you adapt and pivot. The thing that I always think about is I graduated from my MBA program from graduate school in the middle of the global financial crisis in 2008 to 2010. No company was hiring. It was a really challenging time. And in the middle of that, it felt like there was no opportunity or no path forward. Now I look back on that and I'm really grateful because it led me actually into the path that I'm in now in people and talent. And so I think there's a really great opportunity to learn the lesson in all of this. The other thing I will say is gone are the days where you join a company out of college and you stay there for 40 years until you retire. The reality is the average person changes jobs 10 to 15 times over the course of your career. The average worker or the average tenure of workers ages 25 to 34 is 2.8 years. That number is less than a third than that of workers ages 55 to 64. So if you're not totally sure what you want to do and you're worried how you factor that in the middle of the pandemic, you are not alone. And the reality is remote work is here to stay. In a recent survey from Gallup, the research company, almost 2/3 of people surveyed want to keep working remotely as much as possible, even after the COVID-19 lockdowns are lifted, hopefully for good soon. The light is at the end of the tunnel, I hope. So I want to recognize the fact that this is the new normal and it's up to us to figure out how to evolve and adapt there. So I'm sure the question many of you have on your minds, and one of the reasons you're here today, is how you translate the office experience that you gain through your internship or your first job out of college into a remote work environment. Over the last year, as more and more professionals have gotten acclimated to working from home, a huge question has been, what does this look like? It's uncharted territory. It's been something that has been on a lot of people's mind. And it's honestly something we've been thinking about at HubSpot for a long time. And so I hope I can share a couple of small tips to help you think about how to prepare to work remotely, but also how to look for an internship or a job. At HubSpot, we believe that work isn't a place you go, it's a thing we do. And we've found over the last several months, as we were all kind of thrust into this remote work environment, it's that productive work can really happen from anywhere. It doesn't have to be at an office. It can be from your living room, bedroom, office, another kind of workspace, you name it. And it's really about how you approach that versus where you are physically located. But that said, a big question that has been asked by many professionals, and frankly, a lot of students that we talk to as we are hiring students to come work with us at HubSpot, is how do you actually get to know the company culture? How do you have an impact? How do you build relationships when you're not physically located with people? You're on Zoom, you're on Slack, which are a bunch of collaboration tools that we use at HubSpot, and computer screens are kind of taking over our life. Ultimately, our culture is rooted in the fact that it is not tied to an office location. It's rooted in our values. It's rooted in our hearts. And heart is an acronym that we use at HubSpot to kind of define our culture. And so we really focus on how we can make sure that those values transcend the office experience. And so I want to talk about how we have done that and how hopefully it can help you. The first question we get a lot from students in particular who haven't worked in a full-time role before is, how do I think about FaceTime? If I'm going to make an impact, I got to be sitting next to my boss. I got to be in front of my team. I have to be making sure that I am constantly making an impact. The good news is that in this new remote world, you do not need to have FaceTime in networking events, in in-person meetings, in order to make an impact. It's really about being intentional with your time. It's easy to assume that you need that FaceTime, but honestly, it's about the intentionality. It's about sending a quick email, setting up a phone call, scheduling a Zoom chat, setting your intentions and getting to know your team and understanding how they like to work and then communicating appropriately. Make sure you are focused not about how you are face to face with someone, but how do you share information in different ways so that you can communicate the work that you're doing, communicate your impact, and find ways to build relationships. I'm really proud of the fact that I actually have a team that is located all over the world in all of our different offices. And so I've always been in a position where I've had to rely on virtual communication to get to know people. And I think it's really just about taking a step back and understanding how that other person likes to communicate in the absence of a walk by in the hallway or sitting next to someone on their desk. This leads me to my next point, which is that communication is really even more of a priority in today's world. When you're applying for internships, when you're interviewing or networking or just chatting with your fellow students, I'm sure you heard that communication skills are really important, and it shows up in almost every job description. One of the things we've found is it's actually important to over communicate. Check in with your team members if you are in a virtual setting or a virtual internship, virtual job. Set up Zoom calls, not just to talk about work stuff, but to get to know people. Use your company communication channels like Slack or Messenger services. Those spontaneous, informal ways to get to know people are really important. And I think this is where taking a step back and understanding how people like to communicate is really helpful in fostering those relationships. One thing that I found is really important is making sure that I put some time in my calendar to just check in with people on my team. And so I use it as a meeting, and I will have, at the end of the week, I have a 30-minute block that says check in our team at Dublin on a Friday morning, because it is the end of the week for them. I want to make sure I catch them before the weekend. And so find little ways for you to be more intentional in how you communicate with your teams as you are working. You could do the same thing with your manager. Maybe it's an end of day 15-minute check-in to help you make sure that you are fostering that communication. The other thing I will say is, when you are working remotely and you do not have all of the structure of an office, it can be really easy for work life and home life to really blend together. And I would say creating a routine is absolutely essential and makes your remote work more enjoyable. So what I will say is, one of the things I miss about being in the office is actually being able to walk from meeting to meeting, to go from conference room to conference room, or building to building, or even going across town to meet with someone at another company. I am sitting in this space all day, every day, now that we are all working remotely. And so one of the things I try to do is actually build time in my schedule to go for a walk or take a break for lunch or whatever it might be. If you're used to being constantly on email, block off time to take a break from email. And I think using your calendar is a really great way to create routines and be transparent with the team that you're working with. If you're someone who really values exercise, block that time out in your calendar and let your team know that that's important to you, whether it's first thing in the morning or at the end of the day. That's something that's really important to me, as is spending time with my kids. And so my team knows that I have, a bit of time blocked out at lunch every day to have time with my kids when they get home from school before they get onto their virtual schools. So that's a little bit of how to work remotely. I'm sure the question that's on a lot of your minds is how to prepare for job opportunities or find job opportunities when you are working remotely. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to share just a couple of tips that I would encourage you to think about as you are searching for an internship or a full-time role, knowing that it's going to be remote for the foreseeable future. First thing is, start with learning about different companies and learning about which companies are really being thoughtful about how they set their employees up for remote work. See for yourself. There are a lot of great lists out there of best companies for remote work. Built in put one. We can share the link in the chat afterwards, but put out a list of the 50 best companies for remote work. We're proud to be on it. The other resource to look at is Glassdoor. Now, more and more employees are writing feedback on companies about what it's been like to work for those companies in the middle of the pandemic. And so if there's a company that interests you, I would encourage you to dig a little bit and understand how they are setting themselves up for remote work. And this is the first thing I would do as you are starting your job search or your internship search before you even start talking with a company, or recruiter at a company, or a hiring manager at a company. The second thing I would say is ask a lot of questions. As a candidate interviewing for an internship or a full-time role, it is important to ask questions. And now more than ever, you should ask questions about what it's like to work at that company, knowing that the way that people work are so different. And so a couple of questions I would consider asking as you're in an interview or even having those initial conversations is, how did your company transition to remote work? What are some ways you and your team stay connected? Understand what messaging tools they're using. Are they getting creative with like virtual trivia events or things like that? Those types of things are really indicative of how the company values remote work. How does a company maintain an inclusive culture? This is really important. As you think about different remote work, there are going to be different time zones. People are going to work with kids at home or not. They're going to need to be more flexible in how they work. And so the more you can understand how a company is inclusive of all of that and make sure that everyone feels comfortable working in that environment, that is going to be incredibly important. And then lastly, get a sense of what resources companies offer to help people work remotely. One of the things I'm really impressed that our team at HubSpot has done is actually build out learning, like coursework, classes that our employees can take to understand, hey, here are some best practices in how to hold a fully remote meeting. Here are some team norms that you can adopt in Slack or in Zoom to make sure you're inclusive of everyone on the call. Here are some ways you can think about structuring your day working in a remote environment. And also here's some tools that we can offer you to help you better organize your time. And so I would ask that question of what resources a company might offer, because it shows how much they're taking this seriously. And then the last thing I will say is, I think a lot of questions that my team gets from students is, how do we make sure, last year, so many companies cut out their internship opportunities because of the pandemic. I thought I was going to have an internship. It didn't look the way that it panned out to be. I feel like I don't have any experience I can speak to as I'm going for my next internship or for a full-time role. What I would say to you there is, think about your last year at Tufts. Just because you haven't worked remotely before in a corporate setting doesn't mean you haven't worked remotely before. You all went to classwork that was virtual. You had to do group projects virtually. You had to take exams virtually. And that stuff means something. That shows that you were able to adapt to working remotely, even if it wasn't in a corporate setting. And so what I would encourage you to do is think about how you can use that and how you adapted to that to differentiate yourself. Did you learn how to avoid Zoom fatigue because of the way that you were engaging with your classmates in a group project? Did you learn how to project manage a project in a different way because you couldn't all be sitting around a table at the library together, but you were all virtual? Think about some of those examples, and that's going to give you the confidence that you need to go out there and really think about how to position yourself in the best way possible. I think the other thing that you can recognize is that work experience isn't the only experience that makes up who you are as a candidate. And so whether you used the pandemic as an opportunity to try something new, get some new exposure, learn something new, pick up a new hobby, all of those things are part of who you are as a person. And I would just encourage you not to undermine those or dismiss those as you're thinking about going out there for a job. We have a couple of minutes for any questions or comments, but I hope that this gives you just like a quick overview of some of the things that we are thinking about as we transition to remote work, and some of the things I would encourage you to think about as you are looking for your next job or internship and trying to figure out how to navigate the whole process. So with that, huge thank you. We have a couple of minutes if you want to go through any questions. I am keeping an eye on the chat. Otherwise, I am here. My email address is on the slide. I'm happy to answer any questions for you.
So there are about 15 students on the call. If you don't want to type your question, you can also unmute yourself and ask that now. We do have 5 minutes, and if not, we will move right into the next session. So I'll wait for a second, see if anyone has questions.
I'll stop sharing so I can see everyone.
Any questions?
I have a quick question.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. This was all very, very helpful. And I know you touched a little bit on creating or kind of the issue of a work and life blend that happens when we're working virtually. And I'm sort of thinking about my own experience as an intern and thinking about hopefully starting an entry-level job after graduation and kind of wanting to put my best foot forward in that and make a really good impression and work really, really hard and maybe work a little bit extra. But I'm sort of wondering, for that internship or entry level position, how to balance, wanting to make that really good impression, but also maintaining boundaries with that work life kind of distinction.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I think one thing I would say most people struggle with right now because of exactly what you talked about is burnout. You feel, because you are not physically located next to someone, you feel like you have to be online at all hours of the day. You have to be constantly showing that you're working. And honestly, that doesn't help you put your best work out there. And so what I would encourage you to do is actually have a conversation with your manager about it. Ask them how they want to be informed of the work you're doing. Ask them what their expectations are. Ask them how they set boundaries, because what it will do is create space for you to then say, hey, what's really important to me is, I'm a morning person. This is a question I ask my team all the time. When do you like to do your best work? And I'm the kind of person where I would so much prefer to work an earlier day and finish up at the end of the day a little bit earlier, because I'm just not in the right headspace. I'm my kids are yelling in the background. I want to go spend some time with them. And so I think if you can have those conversations early with your manager and your team, you kind of establish some norms, and everyone respects that people are going to work differently. It should not be the expectation that everyone adapts to everyone's schedule, or we kind of accommodate. You need to recognize that everyone has their own work style, and taking a step back and having a conversation is the best way to do that. And in your situation, I would start with your manager.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
All right. I'll give the floor to one more question if there is one from the audience. John? Yep.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, thank you so much for talking with us today. So you emphasize the importance of reflecting on our time at Tufts and using our learnings to differentiate ourselves in some way. And I imagine one way to really differentiate yourself is to show how you took initiative during like a pandemic. And so yeah, basically using challenge to create opportunity. And I was just wondering if you might have some some concrete examples of that. I know it's a very specific question, but I hope,
Yeah. So there are a couple of things you could think about. Maybe because you couldn't find a traditional job internship opportunity last summer, you did something different with your time that was still really valuable. So maybe think about how you might have gotten creative in the absence of a traditional internship opportunity. Maybe you had to go home and help family because of the some situation with the pandemic. That in and of itself is a great opportunity to demonstrate impact. We have someone at HubSpot, and this is a very kind of like extreme example, who at the start of the pandemic, she's very interested in food. She actually started to create cheese and meat boards for like food platters for first responders. And it was like something that she was doing just for fun. She had some free time. She was a sales rep. She is a sales rep at HubSpot. And she started doing this in her free time just because she wanted to have an impact. It has actually turned into an incredibly successful business that she now runs in addition to her full-time role at HubSpot. That is an extreme example. It is such an amazing success story. She now has so many of those. And I'm sure our panelists in the next section are going to talk a little bit about how they kind of transitioned or got creative with their experiences. But I would say it doesn't have to be in the form of a full-time job. Maybe you picked up a really amazing new hobby. You learned how to play an instrument. You learned a new language. You read a new book or became an expert on a topic you hadn't been already. I think all of those are really great ways to show initiative that don't have to be in a corporate job setting. that helpful?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Becky, for that insightful overview about how things work at HubSpot and giving us some faith for the future.